I tried designing my very first mobile app and website in Figma with zero UI experience and somehow ended up creating these. Honestly, I thought UI design is just designed for apps and websites. Turns out, it's also a completely different way of thinking. I recently started a new unit in my design course, which was about UI UX design. And our assignment was to create a mobile app and website prototype using Figma. The problem was I never touched Figma before, so designing apps is something that I am clueless about. I always associated UI design with coding and it being the love child between tech and design. Meanwhile, my experience was mostly posters, branding, and illustration work. So this video is basically what happened when a graphic design student with zero UI experience tries learning Figma for the very first time.
When I first opened Figma, it felt familiar, yet also something very new to me. The toolbar looks similar to Photoshop and Illustrator, with the text tools, shapes, and selection tools. So at first, I thought, okay, maybe this won't be too bad. But then I looked at the right side panel and immediately got overwhelmed. There were layout systems, auto layouts, components, words I had never used before in graphic design. One thing that instantly surprised me though was how organized everything felt. Figma almost feels designed to stop you from making messy layouts. It was so much easier to align elements and text, as the smart guides were incredibly accurate, and unlike Photoshop, I could actually see exact spacing measurements while moving elements around. It made alignment feel weirdly satisfying. Usually in Photoshop or Illustrator, setting up grids feels tedious, but in Figma, you can create and customize grids in seconds. And I quickly realized why UI designers rely on grids so much.
Because in UI design, spacing and structure matter just as much as visuals. That was probably the first big realization. UI design isn't about making things look good, it's about making things easy to understand. After exploring the interface and tools, it was finally to make something of my own. My first project was to design a mobile app interface, and I decided to create a food delivery app since it was the most approachable option for a beginner. But before designing anything, I had to research different styles as required from my assignment, so naturally I went straight to Pinterest.
I chose three different styles, which were bento style, illustrative, and neumorphism. Neumorphism immediately stood out to me because I had never designed anything like it before. It has this soft 3D look that feels like a mix between old realistic app icons from the 2010s and minimal flat design we see everywhere online. And with design trends slowly moving away from flat design recently, I thought it would be interesting to experiment with. After the visual research, it's time to sketch the wireframe. This step was crucial as I needed to know what the interface would look like, and it forced me to actually think about the user experience instead of just visuals. Where would the buttons go? What would users tap first? How do you make a navigation feel intuitive? At this point, I realized UI design was less like decorating and more like solving problems. Then it was time to create the wireframe in Figma, and at first I had no idea what I was doing. I started to create the shapes and text. I wasn't thinking about layout at this point as I needed to get used to the tools. Creating basic elements felt similar to Illustrator, especially when using vector tools and shape operations. But the moment I tried making more custom shapes, I encountered some problems. I couldn't add anchor points to my shape, and the pen tool didn't feel as solid and adjustable compared to Illustrator. So it's only good for simple icons, not complex shapes. And then came the hardest part, creating the neumorphism effects. The challenge now was to create the glass effect. I kept adding effects, hoping it would magically look like glass, but instead, it looked unrealistic. But after experimenting with highlights, opacity, and layered shadows, it finally clicked. and suddenly the interface and textures started looking real. While it was confusing in the beginning, as I had to play around with the settings to achieve my desired effect, it gets intuitive once you get familiar with it. Seeing the finished app made me realize how much progress I made in a short amount of time. Honestly, that moment felt incredibly satisfying because it was my first successful new morphism design. Once I got more comfortable using Figma, I wanted to challenge myself with something more ambitious. So for my second project, I designed a website homepage called Sinosphere Archive. It focuses on educating about East Asian art, history, and fashion. The gallery covers the works from China, Japan, and Korea. The term Sinosphere refers to the regions historically influenced by Chinese culture. The idea behind the website was to create a digital space that collects historical information and images into one place, where East Asian art and history could be admired, studied, and preserved. The first step was to look for references, so I went to museum and art websites such as Google Arts and Culture, the Met, and the Victoria and Albert Museum to get an idea of their user interface. I even looked at specific Asian museum websites like the National Museum of China to get an idea of the types of images and layout they use. I noticed that many museum websites feel very minimal and spacious, almost like walking through a gallery in real life. So I wanted my website to feel calm and minimal. Once I gathered enough references, it's time to move on to sketching. This was actually more challenging than the wireframing, as it's all about the layout and user experience design, where functionality and navigation were crucial. I had to consider many things like reading flow, information hierarchy, navigation, balance, and spacing. I started experimenting with more editorial inspired compositions and timeline sections to make the historical content feel more immersive. After the sketches were done, it's time to wireframe in Figma. One thing that saved me a huge amount of time was using Figma community assets that had icon presets instead of designing everything from scratch. I just found the icons that I needed and customized it to my own. If you're doing any large projects, I highly recommend using Figma presets as they are free and save time. For my colors, I chose a natural color palette as it reminds me of old paper and stone carvings. And the accent color is this celadon green that is based off this Korean vase. I love the elegant shade of green as it would add a pop of color to the website. Once all the UI elements were completed, it was finally time to put everything together. I worked on the header first, making sure to align the text and leave enough white space, and added a banner design with the title, and my plan was to add an image later. I laid image compositions inspired by Google Arts and Culture's rotating image system. I found their design of rotating images unique, and the idea behind this was to have images of the day that the user can look through. After the wireframe was done, came my favorite part, adding the images, where I added some of my favorite historical artifacts and artworks. I had to reorder some of the images, and this was where grids became incredibly useful, so my image placements were not in balance with the UI elements. To add some depth, I added shadows beneath the images, so the interface didn't feel completely flat. The last step was the logo design, and for this, I switched over to Illustrator. My concept was inspired by traditional Chinese seals, the stamp-like signatures historically used in East Asian art and calligraphy, which was the perfect concept for the logo design. I referenced these images of jade dragon artifacts, as I needed a striking visual for my pictorial logo, and the dragon is a mythical creature that is known in all East Asian countries, which creates a sense of unity in my brand. The struggle I faced here was creating smooth lines, as I used the pen tool to trace the dragon head, which was not the easiest to trace as there were many curves. There were moments where the dragon looked completely distorted, and I had to keep redoing the lines over and over again. But eventually, everything came together, and the final step was to just add the logo to the website, and it is fully complete. Honestly, seeing the final result felt really rewarding because it was the first time I created something that felt like a design project and also a world of its own. So after this experience of designing my first UI designs, here's what I learned. The biggest thing I realized is that UI design forced me to think less like a creative and more like a problem solver. As a graphic designer, I usually focus on making things visually expressive or aesthetically pleasing. But UI design is different. Every element has a purpose. Every button, spacing decision, color choice, and layout affects how someone experiences the interface. And honestly, it was much harder than I expected. I realized that creating something functional and intuitive is often more difficult than simply making something look impressive. But at the same time, that's what also made it interesting because learning Figma didn't just teach me a new software, it changed the way I think about design itself. Good design isn't just about making things look beautiful, it's about making things feel effortless for the person using them. I think every creative should try learning something outside their comfort zone at least once. Because you never know what it might teach you and how it might change your perspective. If you've ever tried learning UI design or Figma, let me know what your experience was like. If you enjoy videos about creativity and design, give this video a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.